The Addams Family has survived some truly awful interpretations, but with the arrival of Wednesday on Netflix, we've gotten the first version in which no one involved seems to have ever watched it. With Tim Burton at the helm, we have to assume that isn't literally the case. So why does the entire point of view of this series feel like it was made with complete ignorance of everything our favorite oddball, hypersexed, dissolute aristocrats have always been about? Namely, recreational ultraviolence, strongly implied BDSM, and freaking out the straights through their utter obliviousness to societal norms. The original Charles Addams New Yorker cartoons were a biting critique of post-war American folkways, and almost every episode of the 1964-65 classic TV series involved a clash between conservative suburban expectations and the Addams' bohemian reality, with the latter always getting the final word. After a string of mostly animated outings, director Barry Sonnenfeld brought to the screen two films, The Addams Family in 1991 and Addams Family Values in 1993, that were a perfect fusion of the wackiness of the TV show and the macabre social satire of the drawings. The tragic and untimely death of star Raul Julia, who played, with all respect to John Astin, the definitive Gomez Addams, doomed the franchise to 3 decades of poor and half-hearted attempts in both live-action and animation to revive it. Wednesday is the first serious stab at a full-on reboot for the 21st century, and whether the series is renewed or not, it has accomplished what dynamite, electricity, gunplay, angry mobs, strangling vines, and the guillotine have all failed to do. Wednesday has killed the Addams Family. Or more accurately, these anarchic characters whose family motto, Sic gorgiamus allos subjectados nunc, or we gladly feast on those who would subdue us, suggests a hostility to all forms of authority, simply cannot exist in a world where woke scolds police all our cultural products. So much of the humor of the Addamses was always built around both their capacity to offend and their inability to comprehend the offense. In a society obsessed with both finding offense and then forcing a kabuki of contrition on those who are concluded to have given it, there's no place for a fictional family of sexually and morally liberated sadomasochists who don't care what anyone thinks of them, or no place that modern Hollywood would ever be willing to make. And that's the real problem with reviving the Addams Family in this foul year of our Lord 2022. When last we saw the Addamses, for purposes of this article, I'm going to treat everything that happened after 1993 like that night I blacked out in Tijuana. The establishment was conservative, and Hollywood was liberal. As long as this was true, it was an easy matter to direct the Addams' psychopaths out-of-water gags at suburban Republicans. But when their preferred manicured lawn hunting grounds have been overrun by sex-positive 50 Shades of Grey reading pseudo-deviant weirdo wannabes who would sooner drink cow's milk than say a kind word about the Pilgrims, it's hard to know who to point the Addams' satire at. With the average user on TikTok being like an Addams Family throwaway line about great cousin Cuthbert Addams who had 8 genders and taught elementary school, the writers have a lot less to work with in terms of contrast with the broader society, i.e., the entire joke of the franchise. Worse, if the aim is to freak out the straights and expose their moral hypocrisy, the natural target of any honest and faithful modern adaptation of the Addams Family would set them loose on the "In This House We" lawn sign set. Unfortunately, those people also run Hollywood, and they are not known for their self-deprecating sense of humor. On this score, it's instructive to go back and watch the hilarious opening scene of the 1991 outing. A group of very white, very clean, attractive in the most boring of Hallmark Christmas movie ways carolers belted out in front of the Addams' crumbling Victorian. The camera moves up the front of the mansion until we reach the top, where Lurch and Grandmama are about to dump a cauldron of boiling pitch on the singers, much to the delight of the entire clan. In 1991, the assumption would have been that these were all church-going conservative Reagan Republican types. Watching it today, they play as comfy libs. That changes everything, and there's no way in hell Hollywood is making that movie. They'll sooner greenlight a new straight white male-centered Star Wars trilogy than turn the razor-sharp satire of the Addams Family against their own class. Still, None of that explains why Burton agreed to be complicit in ripping the heart out of an IP that he's probably loved since childhood, or why showrunners Alfred Goh and Miles Millar, who have done some good work, decided to light the Addams Family on fire, and not in a way that they'd like, turning it into a derivative CW-style paranormal teen drama a la Supernatural and Charmed. Unlike in some other cases where the writers were put in charge of a property they clearly didn't know, understand, or particularly like, as in Jessica Gow's She-Hulk, that likely isn't the case here. This isn't Disney after all. So why did talented, competent artists who presumably understood what made the Addams Family funny go charging right off in the opposite direction by turning them into quirky, sensitive, kind-hearted outcasts living uneasily alongside the normies, with full awareness of their own strangeness, which again, there goes the whole joke. Even accounting for the changed social climate, the level of overcorrection is bizarre. I have a theory. It's a tough time to be a straight old white dude working in Hollywood right now. These fellows are looking back over their shoulders and seeing a mob of pink-haired, septum-pierced psychos ready to cancel everyone in their family tree going back to the old country at the first sign of independent thought. The best way to keep working is to show them that you're on the team, even if you don't quite understand the rules, the playing field, the scorekeeping, or the equipment, which is exactly how their ham-handed attempts to inject wokeness into the Addams Family plays, with Wednesday dropping one-liners about the patriarchy and the male gaze, and werewolves refusing conversion camp. The irony here is that the Addamses were woke long before the word was appropriated from black activists. In Addams Family Values, Wednesday breaks up a Thanksgiving play with a monologue about the treatment of Native peoples, followed by an attack on the audience with flaming arrows and tomahawks. In fact, it's completely in character for Wednesday to reference the patriarchy, but the show is sent her off to Nevermore Academy, a school of vampires, werewolves, sirens, and other members of, quote, marginalized communities, who in this world look suspiciously like the same blandly attractive teens one might find on Riverdale or any of the other shows it's desperately trying to copy. So who is the observation for when Wednesday is no longer a freak among normies, but a freak among freaks who all share her point of view? And speaking of freaks, gone are the Siamese twins, follically challenged cousin Its, malformed mutations, and proudly deformed specimens that have always populated the Addamsverse. In a cultural moment that has seen Anne Hathaway forced to apologize to the limb difference community for playing a three-fingered witch, one can only imagine what the reaction to anything approximating the Mamushka scene from the original film would be. It calls to mind H.L. Mencken's famous definition of Puritanism as the haunting fear that someone somewhere may be happy. Audiences would have loved to see anything in this series that conveyed the quirky joy of that scene. But there are 6 people lately moved to Mastodon whose feelings might be hurt, so fuck it. Abercrombie and Fitch aesthetics it is. Which brings us to maybe the weirdest, but also the most revealing level on which Wednesday does a complete about-face from its legacy. It not only isn't sexy, it's almost anti-sexy. Sure, there's some teen romance and a couple of chaste kisses, but overall, it makes Netflix's much better adaptation of Sabrina the Teenage Witch look like Caligula. Tim Burton has taken the Addams Family, whose 60s TV incarnation pushed up against the absolute outer limits of what could be expressed through double entendre, and toned it down to such a degree that Wednesday could be shown on Nickelodeon without raising any eyebrows. Why? Well, part of it may be the fear of the 3 straight old white guys in charge of being accused of perving on teenagers, something that did get thrown at Sabrina, which featured teen orgies, and legitimately seemed to go out of its way to find reasons to get leading actress Kiernan Shipka naked, even if only in a strategically shot sense. But it may have more to do with the fact that in the end, woke sexuality has led us right back to a prudishness that's as Victorian as the Addams' mansion. We can see this in the numbers. Only 40% of American high school students reported having sex in a 2020 study. Lord only knows what the numbers are post-pandemic. That's a 15% drop from the early 90s. This may be owed to the way technology is turning the species into something out of a David Cronenberg body horror outing where everyone has lost their genitals and can only get off in front of a screen. But it could also be that we've made the whole thing so complicated and fraught with arcane perils far more frightening than pregnancy or rejection that a lot of people, particularly boys, would rather just play Grand Theft Auto and jack off. The seeming determination to banish anything approaching arousal in the audience begins literally from the first shot, when we discover that short, squat, gritty Latino actor Luis Guzman has been cast as suave, eccentric, aristocratic Gomez Addams. It takes a minute before we then figure out that the rather plump version of the gothically wan, pale, long, and lean Morticia that Guzman is pawing in the back of their limo is none other than Catherine Zeta-Jones, who spends most of the rest of the series in a daze with no clear understanding of who she's playing or why she's there. To make matters worse, Wednesday watches her parents kissing with disgust, which is a problem on many levels. Firstly, part of the creepy fun weirdness of the Addamses was their children's preternaturally blasé attitude towards their constant PDAs. One always got the sense with Pugsley and Wednesday that they had probably learned all the mechanics of sex by watching two Gorgons fucking in the basement or something, and that they likely saw their parents going at it out in the open all the time.
Our parents had sex.
The second problem here is that we relate to her reaction because these are not two actors we actually want to see fucking. And that's really bad when they're playing the ideally sexy and perpetually horny Morticia and Gomez Addams. This awful casting is such an unforced error that it's hard to explain even in the context of an Addams family whose creative team is terrified of getting accused of stuff. Something that if they've been paying any attention, they should have known would happen no matter what they did. It's worth mentioning that Jenna Ortega as Wednesday does her best with the material she's been handed. She'd be a fine Wednesday in a show that gave her more to do than drop predictable one-liners and dance kind of funny in a scene. But this is not that show. This could also just be a Tim Burton issue. His body of work is generally lacking in sex, sexuality, or indeed anything approximating real human behavior. He started out as a Disney animator, and one has always gotten the sense that he's more comfortable with dolls and animation cells than actors, and relates better to color palettes than the complexities of real people. On that level, he may have just been a counterintuitively terrible choice for the Addams family, once you realize that it isn't a flesh-and-blood version of Corpse Bride. It's a lot more subversive than that, and Burton may only have wanted to do it because he liked the goth clothes and the cool mansion, which ironically does not appear. The saddest thing about this is Wednesday looks like it's going to be around for a while. It quickly gained the #1 spot on Netflix, spurred by an audience too young to know better, and their suburban lib parents who tend to like their entertainment shallow and in accord with their own pet opinions and high self-regard. On that level, everyone involved in burning the Addams family at the stake with this monstrosity knew exactly who they were making this for, and you have to admit in that way they succeeded. Given how long it took to get a major reboot, we probably won't see an Addams family that's anything more than the hijacking of a popular IP in service of a crappy teen drama until around 2053. And by that time, I fully expect to be dead, along with most of the human race. But until the apocalypse finds us, we'll always have the reruns. Thanks for watching.
Please clap.